Last summer, my girlfriend and I spent 10 days enjoying the warm Aegean sun on the islands of Santorini and Paros. And today I wanted to share what we got up to, how much it cost us, and my overall thoughts for anyone who's thinking of travelling to either of these places in the near future. I'll go through our trip chronologically, which means Santorini is up first. We flew out from London on the 23rd of June and arrived early in the afternoon, and knowing that we had a couple of busier days ahead, we decided to spend the rest of the day relaxing at our accommodation. We stayed at a place called Santorini View Studios Fira Stefani. As of the making of this video, it currently has 118 reviews on Google and a 4.9 out of 5-star rating. I cannot speak highly enough about this place, but I will try and quickly explain why we were both such fans. Firstly, the view. It looks good on camera, but I promise you it is so much better in person. Walking down the main staircase for the first time to reach the hotel and taking it in is something I will never forget. Now, if you're watching this video, you'll probably have heard of the crowds of Santorini. We had, and this was very much front of mind when booking this trip. Rather than adding a couple more bodies to the pack, we prioritised having our own private view, which we could call ours for the 3 nights that we were there. Now, do you pay a premium for this? Of course, but I cannot emphasise enough how worth it this is. Watching the sunset from our own little porch area with a beer in hand is one of those memories I'm constantly trying to take myself back to. Secondly, Santorini View Studios is located on the outskirts of the largest settlement on the island, Fira. It's just over a 10-minute walk to get to the centre, where you'll find a large selection of shops and restaurants, and being on the outskirts means you're the right amount removed from some of the busyness of the town centre, but not so far that it's an inconvenience to go to and from. Now, the other reason why I loved its location is because, from Fira, I personally think you have the best view of the caldera. Oia tends to be the other main town that people stay in, which is located on the northern tip of Santorini. It boasts some equally beautiful views, and some of Santorini's most well-known postcard shots can be found here, but personally you just don't get the same epic landscape view of the caldera as you do in Fira. Now that I'm done giving Santorini View Studios some excellent unpaid for publicity, what did we actually get up to besides lounging around drinking beer on our porch? On our first full day, we took a leisurely stroll into Fira in the morning, got some food, browsed at some shops, and then headed back to our hotel as we were getting picked up at 1 PM and taken down to the marina of Vleshada, if I said that correctly, for a sunset cruise which we had pre-booked ahead of time. Now, a quick overview of the cruise that we went on. It lasted around 7 hours. There were 20 people total on the boat. A family-style dinner is included in the cost, which was fairly basic, but I had no complaints about it. A couple of drinks are also included in the price, although some people on board definitely seemed to consume more than a couple. It took us from the very bottom of Santorini into and around the caldera and dropped us off in Oia after sunset. And finally, for the two of us, the tour cost £322. All in all, it was a great way to spend our afternoon and evening, so I would definitely recommend. We didn't have a pool at our apartment, so it was really nice being able to take a dip in the sea and also get some snorkeling in. My only criticism was that whilst the group isn't massive by any means, there were probably too many people on the boat, which just meant that everyone was a little squished in together in the front deck. I reckon if there were 2 or 3 people less, it would have been better for sure. The next day, we decided to hike from Fira to Oia, which is just over 10 kilometers. What probably wasn't the best decision on our part was to start the hike around midday rather than setting our alarms early and heading out whilst the sun was a little lower in the sky. We were fine in the end, but there were points where there was next to zero shelter from the sun, and Jess, with all of her long black hair, was pretty uncomfortable from the sheer heat of the sun combined with some of the uphill sections. Despite the heat, I would definitely recommend this hike. It's fairly easy going with really only one major uphill part, but the views you're rewarded with are spectacular. You'll also walk past some pretty lavish hotels along the way, and while some of them looked amazing, their location in my opinion left a lot to be desired, as they seemed pretty out the way of everything, but maybe that's what the people who are staying there are looking for. Besides the night before when we were dropped off by the cruise, this was the only time that we were in Oia. I found it was a little busier than Fira, but I have to say that Santorini in general just wasn't as bad for crowds as I was expecting. I think what I'd seen online and what I'd heard from people I know that had been to Santorini meant I'd mentally prepared myself for some of the busiest crowds I'd ever seen whilst travelling, and it just simply wasn't the case. Are there a lot of people? Sure, but I feel like I've been to far more crowded places. So maybe you can put it down to going in June instead of July or August, as we went just before the school summer holidays, so if that is the case, then it's definitely something to consider. Anyway, back to Oia. We loaded up on some calories after the hike and went to find some of the iconic spots, which again were way less crowded than I thought they'd be. We soaked in the views, snapped some pics, and then decided to get a taxi back as we felt pretty sweaty and were in desperate need of a shower after hiking in the sun for most of the day. For our final evening, we watched the sunset once again on our porch and then went to a pizza restaurant a short walk away called Vulcan Pizza, which was a great spot with a great view and served great pizzas. Even though it felt like we'd only just arrived, the next morning we sadly had to pack our bags and begin making our way to the second island we were visiting on this trip, which was Paros. We got a taxi down to the main port of Santorini, which is the one that all the ferries use, and it's recommended you arrive an hour or so before departure. We booked online about a week before our trip after reading that it's wise to book in advance rather than on the day. Then each ticket from Santorini to Paros cost €50 and the journey was 1 hour and 45 minutes. We arrived in Paros at 10:45am, picked up our rental car and then headed to our accommodation. Unlike in Santorini, where I found you're discouraged into renting a hire car because of how busy the roads can get, in Paros I would say a hire car is absolutely necessary if you're wanting to properly explore the island. We were planning on being in Paros for 4 nights, so naturally booked the hire car for 4 days, which cost us £160. In Paros, we stayed at a place called Itinerary Hotel, which was just outside the main town of Parikia. Like Santorini View Studios, it had exceptional reviews on Google Maps, although Itinerary was a lot cheaper because, unlike before, we didn't feel the need to pay more to secure our own private view of Santorini sunsets. But that's not to say that we didn't still have a beautiful view from our apartment. We found that all the towns on the island were quintessentially Greek and all beautiful in their own right. We naturally spent a lot of time in the town of Parikia because it was just down the road and you are spoiled for choice with all the bars and restaurants on offer. Special shout out to Brothers Cafe, which became our go-to place to watch the sunset over a couple of cocktails and snacks. Perhaps the most Greek-looking town on the island is a town called Lefkes, the ancient capital of the island. You can easily spend the best part of an afternoon here just wandering about all its cute little streets. Every corner you turn looks like something from a postcard, and if you weren't aware of Greece's thriving cat population, you certainly will be after visiting Lefkes. The other main town you'll want to visit at some point during your stay in Paros is called Naousa. We went here just for one evening and annoyingly I left my GoPro in our apartment, so for this part of the video you'll have to make do with what I captured on my iPhone and the photos I took on my camera. From what I could tell whilst researching about the town before going, the main part of Naousa is this mini port which has an old and very picturesque ruin of a castle guarding its entrance. As time went by, this area got busier and busier, giving the place a real buzz as the sun gradually set and day turned to night. After our drink, we then had to make the calculated decision whether we risk getting soaking wet by walking out to the ruins I previously mentioned. There was a small group also thinking this through until a couple of more daring and fearless younger girls went for it without even a moment's contemplation, and naturally we couldn't not at that point, so as long as you keep an eye on the waves and get your timing right, you'll be fine. But if you are looking to add a little more excitement to your evening, then I would definitely recommend this. I found that the incoming waves hit some parts of the walkway more gently than others, and so if you are looking for the postcard shot of Naousa, then this is where you'll get it. If you're looking for more white-stoned buildings and cobbled streets to wander beyond the 3 main towns I've covered, then you'll need to hop on the ferry and head over to the island called Antiparos. I learned that anti is the Greek word for opposite, so the island's name is very appropriate given its close proximity to the island of Paros. Catching the ferry is super easy as they run every half an hour and it only takes 7 or so minutes to get from A to B. We spent a couple of hours here doing more of the same, wandering around, popping into shops and grabbing bites to eat. I wouldn't say there's much to do beyond that, but taking it slow was exactly what we had in mind when we booked Paros, as we expected the Santorini leg of the trip to be a little more hectic. Speaking of taking it easy, besides exploring the picturesque towns Paros has to offer, we also spent a fair amount of time relaxing by the beach. We only went to 2 over the course of the 5 days we were there. The first is called Monastiri Beach and is located on the northernmost point of the island. We went here following a recommendation from the manager of the hotel we were staying at and ended up coming back here because we liked it so much the first time. Are the sunbeds expensive? Of course they are. Does the same go for the food and the drinks? Probably. So if you're not expecting to pay a premium for the whole beach club vibe, then there are plenty of other less commercialized beaches on Paros for you. The second beach we went to is called Golden Beach, which is located on the southeast of the island. Golden Beach is much bigger, which means unlike Monastiri Beach, you'll have no issues finding a spot to plant your umbrella or lay down your towels if you're not looking to pay for sunbeds. We planned to be there for a while, so we thought we would fork out the money to get some more sunbeds and add it to the ever-growing tab that we were going to concern ourselves with once we were back in the UK. My main criticism with Golden Beach was that because it was so much more open than Monastiri, it was very windy. This is great if you're into windsurfing, which Golden Beach is well known for, but less fun when you're trying to relax and have sand constantly whipping up into your face. In the summer months, the Cyclades Islands are renowned for being quite windy, so it's not something you're likely to escape entirely, and I guess this can be most pronounced on the coast. It was the only time we've really felt it, so I wouldn't say it's something we were having to put up with over all 5 days we were there, but be warned. So that just about wraps up everything that we did in Paros, but seeing as there's no airport in Paros, it wasn't quite the end of our trip. We were flying out of Santorini, so whilst we had the not so fun experience of another ferry journey, it did mean that we had one more night in Santorini, which we were hardly against given how much we both missed the place as soon as we'd left the first time. In a way, we didn't have an option, as whilst our flight was at the reasonable time of 2:20 in the afternoon, that didn't give us a big enough window of time to get the ferry that morning and make it to Santorini Airport in time for our flights, so one to watch out for when you're booking your own trip. For our final night, we stayed on the much cheaper side of the island at a place called Salini Hotel, but despite being on the other side of the island, we couldn't turn down the chance to see the Caldera view one final time. So we hopped on a bus and made our way to a restaurant called Addis, which I would highly recommend, and if you do decide to go, then make sure you book ahead of time and ask for a table with a view. As always, before we wrap up the video, the oh so important cost breakdown for those who are interested. Our return flights from London to Santorini cost £503. For accommodation, we spent £700 on the 4 nights in Santorini, and that includes our last night at the cheap hotel on the east side of the island, and then we spent another £615 on our accommodation in Paros, which covered 5 nights total. Our ferry tickets cost £169 and the cost of our hire car for the 5 days was £154. Finally, we spent £764 on food and drink and then about £310 on a mix of other things like fuel for the car, sunbeds and gifts we bought for either ourselves or family and friends back home. This brings the grand total to £3,216 or £1,608 each. Now, considering the last video I did covered an entire month in New Zealand, which cost me £2,600, I am under no illusion that this wasn't the cheapest holiday. But given this trip was in part to celebrate Jess's 30th, and it was our only trip together in 2023, we wanted to really go all out and worry about our finances later. Santorini in particular is not a place we picture ourselves going on a yearly basis, so we were prepared to spend a little more on accommodation than we normally would in order to do it right, and neither of us have any regrets whatsoever about doing so. The Greek islands were somewhere that both of us had wanted to go for a long time, so glad we were able to tick it off the list, and they 100% lived up to our expectations. We had an absolutely incredible time, and I would highly recommend both islands for anyone that is on the fence or trying to plan their own trip and having difficulty choosing between which islands to go to. I'm sure we'll be back at some point in the future and would love to visit some other islands that are on offer, so if you're watching and have some recommendations of your own, then please leave them in the comment section below, or if you have any questions about our trip, then fire away. As always, I hope this video has helped you in some way, whether you're looking for travel inspiration or you're already firmly committed to the Greek islands and in the thick of planning. Leave a like if so, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.